My friends are on the phone with me, Don and Patrick. We're going to be asking you some questions that we're going to be putting on the podcast and stuff. Just basically social stuff that's going on, stuff that we want to get your opinion on it and see what you think about certain things.
Okay, well, go ahead with it.
All righty. Pat?
Awesome. Hey, Miss Jane. My name is Pat. Pleasure to meet you, by the way. I've seen plenty of your videos for the past couple of years and just really appreciated a lot of the stuff that you've done. For me personally, this is a kind of a personal question to me, not necessarily one that I've gotten from other people. I don't think that I'm racist, but racism is such a systemic thing in our country, and it's something that I've grown up with. I live in the South. I grew up in Memphis. Growing up in a system that has racism so just embedded in it systemically, I've probably done racist things without knowing it and without being able to point it out. Is there anything that I can do to figure out when I'm doing something racist without someone just blatantly calling it out and being like, hey, that's kind of racist?
You might say to somebody before you decide to do something, this is what I want to do. Is this racist? And when they say, are you crazy? Then you'll know that's racist. We all say things and do things that are racist. So we try to stay away from those who might confront us. And by staying away from those who might confront us, we never learn. We're better to say what we're thinking and to somebody we trust. And if they're really trustworthy, they'll say, you know, what you just said is a racist statement, whether or not it sounds like one or feels like one to you. The way I take that is, and then you won't do that again. And there's a good way to find out how many of the statements that you're going to make are racist. Go to my website, janeelliott.com. Download the printed materials, printed learning materials. The first page is a set of typical statements that white folks make that think they aren't racist. Go through those and check those that you have said or that you have heard. Then go to the next page, which is a clarification of those statements, how those statements are perceived when you're on the receiving end of them. It's a real learning experience. You won't realize how ugly you sound until you read how that sounds to somebody else. After you've done that, you'll say to yourself, well, I know a lot of problems, but I don't have any solutions. The third page is a set of commitments to combat racism. 18 things you can do in your own environment to deal with your own problem. And racism is an individual problem. If you graduated from high school in the United States of America and you are a racist, you weren't listening. We teach in this country what we call education is actually indoctrination. It takes us from the age of 5 to the age of 18 to thoroughly condition children to the myth of white male superiority. We work hard at it, and we are very successful at what we do. We used to just start with you at the age 5, but I believe it was Richard Nixon who said, give me a child from the ages of 3 to 5, and he will be mine for a lifetime. At that point, we started early childhood ed. So now we have these kids from the age of 3 to 18. And God help the child who doesn't learn the lesson. And the lesson is, there are 4 or 5 different races on the face of the earth, and one of them, the white race, began in the Caucasus Mountains, and that's where all the intelligence in the human race comes from. We don't teach where we really came from. We wouldn't dare teach, but I'm going to, and that's going to make me even less popular than I am now. We don't teach that white people are just faded black folks. Because the only reason there are any white people is because black folks left sub-Saharan Africa and populated every landmass on the face of the earth. Their skin color, their eye color, and their hair color changed as they went farther and farther from the equator because they were exposed to less and less sunlight. It has nothing to do with being God's chosen children. We've got to start teaching the truth about that because within 30 years, white people will be a numerical minority in the United States of America. We've got to start getting white people prepared to see people of color in positions of power. That's the way it is. They are going to be the ones who are running this show within 30 years. And it'll be before that, because look at the last election. We found out suddenly that women might be capable of writing laws and helping to run this country. It has taken us 250 years to decide that.
That's always been a backward thinking with any person has intelligence and input because we all have different experiences. I would never put somebody down for having an idea. It may not be the best idea for the time, but if they have an implementation and way to bring it about, it might be the best in the long run.
But you have to be careful with that because this fool that's in the presidency right now thinks he has lots of good ideas. just because an idea sounds good doesn't mean that it is. And a third of the voting population agreed with him, and they're allowing him to say that this is the greatest was ever held in the United States of America. He's lying again. But his followers, they're preaching from his book, and they need to stop that. That wasn't the greatest victory ever. Number one, for the popular vote, it wasn't a victory at all. He got 3 million less votes than Hillary Clinton did. But the people in 4 states had never been told what the Electoral College is supposed to do. If they had been trained, he would not be president today. We've got to do a better job of training the members of the Electoral College. You cannot put someone in there who isn't fit for the presidency, and that's what they did, because they weren't told, look, here's the reason Thomas Jefferson put that in the Constitution, you better follow it.
That's exactly true as well. With our president now, I'm surprised he won.
Well, he was too.
I'm not a blind follower of anyone. So, I mean, I see the good and bad in everybody. And the president is more of a figurehead. We do have the Congress and House to run our government.
Wait. A Congress without backbone, members of a Congress without backbone, which is what we have in the Republican Party right now, and judges that have been appointed. Major share of the judges in the United States now have been appointed by a man who is a liar and a thief and a cheat. And we're going to have to live with their decisions for the next at least 50 years. Does that not upset you?
I would hope that the judges that were approved by him had enough sense to be in their thing to know that the changing climate, once he leaves, will go with the next president and hopefully make wise decisions.
I hope you're right. I hope you're right.
Yeah, I can be an optimist, right?
That's all right. And hey, go ahead and be an optimist. That's a good thing to be, and I'll help you when you cry.
I won't cry over
I'll
anything.
I'll hold the Kleenex while you blow your nose.
I won't cry over anything. My day will go on. I'm.
Oh, well, I cry over the fact that I have a great-grandchild that is going to have to live with the decisions made by judges who were appointed by this man.
Yeah.
Now, that is scary. And he is part Hispanic. So, and his father, evidently, some of his ancestry came from one of those what Donald Trump calls shithole countries. So how good do you think his chances are for being successful if anything has to be decided by somebody that Mr. Trump appointed? This isn't something that will go away. If those results come back, they're back. And if we find out that he was guilty of obstruction, and he did cooperate with a foreign country to hurt this country, those judges aren't going to go away. They will still be there.
Yeah, and
so will that miserable person they put on the Supreme Court this last year.
So even if he goes away and they impeach him, we're still stuck with somebody that was his second in command, right? So
that's right. We'll still be stuck with a man who doesn't want to be alone in a room with a strange woman. That's the intelligence of these two guys. And you couldn't find anybody any stranger than Mr. Pence. I mean, they don't come much stranger than that.
I definitely agree with a lot of the stuff you're saying. I have a problem with modern Democrats too.
You just voiced an oxymoron. Modern Democrats.
Democrats aren't Democrats. They're centrist at best.
That's right. There's no such thing as a modern Democratic thing anymore as a realistic Republican.
Exactly. I mean, that's kind of why I was saying modern Democrat instead of just centrist, because not everyone thinks that way, right? So that's what I've been thinking about a lot recently, is just what people pass off as your standard Republican these days is kind of an extremist. And what people pass off as a Democrat these days are pretty much just centrists that are just trying to play both sides of it just so they can get a paycheck, it feels like.
Well, no, I think some of them are just trying to survive until they find out what is going to happen in the next 6 months. Because this is scary. What's going to happen in this country in the next 6 months? You have to remember, Bannon and Breitbart, and I watched Bannon and Reince Priebus when Bannon said, Mr. Trump has got to deconstruct this government. And that is exactly what he's trying to do, because he doesn't understand what will happen if you deconstruct this government. And when you hear Kellyanne Conway say, well, there are alternative facts, he doesn't lie. He just tells alternative facts. Now, if that isn't frightening to people, I don't know what will be. When we were kids, our teachers taught us that George Washington never told a lie. our great-grandchildren will be told that Donald Trump never told the truth. And that's a bad thing that's a bad thing to know about the President of the United States. Think about that. This man is trying to chop down the tree of knowledge instead of the cherry tree. That's a pretty good statement. I think I'll remember that. Anyway,
right.
Next question.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, with the way everything is, with how accessible information is now, I don't understand why people still just go through one venue. Now, I don't understand why when people see things posted on Facebook or whatever, like the Native American guy and the teenager, nobody really thought to actually go look and see more than just one side of what was going on, you know? Everything just seems to be one-sided. Because you're able to just get online and just look at this information and try and verify stuff, and instead of just going off, okay, well, I heard such and such a thing, or somebody just says one thing, you're just going to go off one person's opinion or whatever they say. I guess because other people back this person up, they believe it. That's not the way it should be, you know. I mean, that's the way that I feel, but I mean.
Well, but you have to remember that people who watch the television news aren't interested in depth. They just want to hear the news of the day. That's why there are only small pieces there, because they don't want you to know too much. That was it in Shakespeare. I think Julius Caesar said, that man is dangerous. He thinks too much. We don't say that about many people in this country because we don't think too much. We don't think enough. We get our news off television, and television depends on being able to tell something in a short form. Vast majority of people in the United States do not investigate after what they hear. They just take that as being the whole truth. We are not a terribly thoughtful society. If we were, we wouldn't be in the mess we're in.
Man, I mean, like
not everybody goes and looks it up.
Right.
You go and look it up. Most of us don't. Most of us don't go and look it up. Most of us think, well, they said it. I can remember Walter Cronkite. If Walter Cronkite said it, it must be true. Yeah. And we would nod and be yes, Walter Cronkite said, and then later on we check out and find out that, well, he only told us part of the truth. Why didn't he tell us the whole thing? Because we aren't ready for the whole thing. And they'll say to you, you aren't ready for the whole thing. We can only tell you what we think you can stand. And Adolf Hitler says, what luck for rulers that men do not think. Now think about that.
Yeah, ruling class definitely does not benefit from a society that knows how to think and that's well educated.
That's right. We would not, the man who's in the presidency right now would not be there, except he depended on people who don't think.
Yeah, I mean, exactly, like, it was more like a popularity thing. I mean, granted, at least Reagan was a fairly decent president, and he won on a very similar...
Reagan? Reagan bought his way to the top. He was a Democrat until the Kennedys came along, and it was obvious that they had decided to found a dynasty. He knew he couldn't beat any Kennedy, so he became a Republican.
Yeah, but
I'm telling you the truth here. This is what he did. He said while he was doing it, well, the Kennedys are going to be in the presidency forever. I can't beat them. I won't get elected to the presidency, so I'll become a Republican. He didn't believe anything he was saying, and he was surprised that anybody else did.
Yeah, at least he wasn't as bad as our current president's what I'm saying. You know,
nothing was ever as bad as our current president. He even makes Andrew Jackson look like a human being. Which is difficult.
Yeah, that is.
I mean, I remember I was there when Andrew Jackson was president. You realize that, of course. Dead silence. Like well, that. What's your next question?
It is sobering to talk to someone that has been around for that much. It does kind of sober you up a bit when it's like the stuff that you read in history books. Someone's like, "Oh yeah, I remember that asshole." Like.
Yeah, well, do you happen to remember who our first black president was?
Not a clue.
Lincoln.
Abraham Lincoln. He was part white, part black, and part Cherokee Indian, and you didn't know that, did you?
I did not.
I thought he was Indian, but
I would assume they probably omit that from the history books they have in schools.
We didn't dare put that in the history books because then it would give black people and Cherokee Indians the idea that maybe someday they could get to be president. You can't constantly push the myth of white superiority by admitting the greatness of those who are other than white. So we push the lie, and it is a lie.
Well, we're all one race, so we've had great inventors of every skin color, but
of every color and every culture. And we members of the white color group take everything good out of cultures, other cultures, and everything good out of people of other colors and claim them as our own and take credit for them because we're good at that.
Yeah, it's like sometimes, we improve on it as whites, but sometimes we don't and still just take credit. I mean,
we simply take credit for it. Because we have the power to take credit for it. We have the power to change the lie into truth, and if you tell it 4 times, people will begin to believe it. And this president knows that.
I have 3 teenage boys, and I tell them, I said in school, I said, your history books are wrote by winners. All wars that were won, the winners write the war. They don't put.
That's right. The winners write the history.
Yeah. And I said, so you can't believe everything you get from your school. I said, go look on the internet. Sometimes things on the internet are a lie. I said, but other people have been there, talk to older people, other generations. Listen to your grandfather. He was in Vietnam. He would tell you when he came back, how people reacted to him coming back from the war. People are forgetting that they come back a veteran and people are spitting on them and other things. Nowadays, everybody's like, oh, veterans this, veterans that. Yeah, 30, 40 years ago, well, 45 years ago when he came back, they didn't like him as a veteran. But whether the war was right or not, he got drafted, but he went in the Navy instead of going to be in the Army. Because my grandfather was in the Army. He goes, if you're in the Navy, at least you got a bed to sleep in every night. So my dad.
Well, these people are going to find out what that's like unless somebody puts a stop order on this man's obvious desire to have war in the